The arrogant cowboy disrespected the town's grandmother. Her response shocked everyone. Part 1. The stranger rode into Copper Ridge at high noon with dust clinging to his black coat and arrogance written across his face. Jake Morrison had heard about this town from a card player in Santa Fe. He tied his horse outside the general store and pushed through the door without removing his spurs, scraping deep gouges into the wooden floor. Inside, an elderly woman stood behind the counter, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes sharp despite the lines around them. Martha Wells had run this store for 40 years, since before most folks in town were born. She looked up at Jake and smiled politely. "Help you with something, young man?" Jake laughed, a harsh sound that made the other customers turn their heads. "Young man? Lady, I ain't been young in 15 years. Just get me tobacco and whiskey. And make it quick." Martha's smile didn't falter. "We don't sell whiskey here." "You'll want the saloon down the street. Tobacco's on the shelf behind you." "I said make it quick," Jake repeated, louder this time. He slammed his hand on the counter. "You deaf or just stupid?" The store went silent. 2 ranchers near the feed sack stopped talking. A mother pulled her daughter closer. Martha straightened her shoulders and met Jake's eyes without blinking. "Sir, I'll ask you once to mind your manners. This is a respectable establishment." Jake leaned across the counter, his breath stale with yesterday's liquor. "Respectable? This whole town looks like it should have died 20 years ago. Just like you should have." He snatched the tobacco from the shelf, threw a coin on the counter that was half what it cost, and walked out. The door slammed behind him. Martha stood perfectly still for 3 seconds, then turned to finish helping her other customers as if nothing had happened. But everyone saw the tightness around her mouth, the way her hands moved just slightly slower than before. Jake spent the afternoon drinking at the saloon, telling anyone who'd listen about the pathetic old woman at the general store. He mocked her voice, exaggerated her movements, made crude jokes about her age. The bartender, a quiet man named Eddie, served him without comment, but watched everything with careful eyes. By evening, word had spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire. Martha Wells wasn't just any old woman. She was the grandmother of 3 children she'd raised alone after her daughter died in childbirth. She'd fed half the town during the drought of 1872. She'd nursed people through fever, loaned money she never asked back, and kept the general store running when times got so hard that other businesses closed their doors forever. When Jake finally stumbled out of the saloon at sundown, weaving slightly from the whiskey, he found his horse exactly where he'd left it. But something was wrong. The saddle sat crooked. The saddlebags hung open. His bedroll lay in the dirt. He cursed and stumbled forward trying to fix the mess, but his fingers were clumsy and his vision blurred. A group of men watched from the saloon porch, their faces unreadable in the failing light. Jake finally gave up and decided to find a place to sleep it off. He'd deal with whoever did this in the morning. Part 2, Jake woke before dawn with a pounding headache and rage burning in his chest. Someone had messed with his gear, disrespected him, and he meant to find out who. He stumbled to the water trough and dunked his head, then made his way back to the general store. If that old bat was opening early, she'd tell him who touched his horse, or he'd make her sorry. The store was dark. Jake pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. No answer. He pounded again, harder. A voice came from behind him. "She opens at 7. You got an hour to wait." Jake spun around. A young man stood there, maybe 25, with sandy hair and a calm expression. He wore a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. "You her grandson or something?" Jake asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "Nope. Just the deputy. Name's Carl Baker, and you need to step away from that door before you break something you'll have to pay for." Jake laughed. "You gonna make me, boy?" Carl didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't touch his gun. "I don't need to make you do anything. You'll do what's right on your own, or you'll face the consequences. Your choice." Something in the deputy's eyes made Jake hesitate. He'd faced down plenty of lawmen, but this one didn't look scared or angry. He looked patient, like he had all the time in the world and knew exactly how this would end. Jake spat in the dirt and walked toward the saloon instead. The bartender was sweeping when Jake pushed through the door. Eddie looked up, nodded once, and went back to sweeping. "You gonna serve me or just stand there?" Jake demanded. "I'll serve you. Soon as I'm done sweeping." Jake felt his temper rising again. Everything in this town moved too slow, and everyone acted like they owned the place. He grabbed a chair and sat down hard, the wood creaking under his weight. 5 minutes later, Eddie finally came over. "What'll it be?" "And information." "Who messed with my horse yesterday?" Eddie poured the drink with steady hands. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Like hell you don't. Someone went through my gear while I was in here drinking. Somebody in this town thinks they're clever. Maybe you just didn't secure it proper, Eddie said. Happens when a man drinks too much. Jake grabbed Eddie's wrist, but the bartender didn't flinch. He just looked down at Jake's hand, then back up at his face, and something in that look made Jake let go. You're making enemies fast, Eddie said quietly. Might want to think about moving on. I'll leave when I'm ready. And not because some bartender tells me to. Jake drank 3 more whiskeys as the morning crowd filtered in. Ranchers, shopkeepers, a few women heading to the market. They all gave him a wide berth, their conversations dropping to whispers when they passed his table. He could feel their eyes on him, judging him, and it made his blood boil. At 7 o'clock sharp, he headed back to the general store. This time the door was unlocked. Martha stood behind the counter again, sorting through a box of canned goods. She looked up when he entered, her expression neutral. Morning. What can I do for you? You can tell me who went through my saddlebags yesterday. Martha set down the can she was holding. I wouldn't know anything about that. I was here in the store all day. Don't play games with me, old woman. Somebody in this town, Mrs. Wells, she interrupted. If you're going to speak to me, you'll use my name properly. Jake felt his face flush. Who did this woman think she was? Fine. Somebody messed with my horse. And I got a feeling you know who. Even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. A man who can't show basic respect doesn't deserve answers. Jake stepped closer to the counter. You think you're tough? You think this town will protect you? Martha didn't back away. I think you're an angry young man who's lost his way. And I think you'll leave Copper Ridge today or tomorrow, and we'll all forget you were ever here. But before you go, you might want to check your horse again. I heard someone mention seeing a rattlesnake near the hitching post earlier. Jake's eyes widened. He turned and ran out of the store, his boots pounding on the boardwalk. When he reached his horse, he found it standing calmly, no snake in sight. But tucked into his saddle was a note written in neat handwriting. Respect costs nothing. Disrespect costs everything. He crumpled the note and threw it down, then checked his saddlebags. Everything was there, exactly as he'd left it, nothing missing. But the message was clear. Someone was watching him. Someone was playing games. Jake looked up and down the street. People went about their business, nobody paying him any attention, but he could feel it now. The weight of their collective judgment, the way an entire town could turn against a single man without saying a word. He mounted his horse and rode toward the edge of town, but something stopped him. Pride, maybe, or stubbornness, or the simple fact that he'd never backed down from anything in his life. He turned the horse around and rode back to the center of Copper Ridge. If they wanted to play games, he'd show them what happened when you messed with Jake Morrison. Part 3. Jake spent the next 2 days making himself a problem. He rode his horse through gardens, leaving deep hoof prints in carefully tended soil. He interrupted church service by firing his gun in the air outside, claiming he'd seen a coyote. He cheated at cards in the saloon. And when someone called him on it, he started a fight that left 2 men with bloody noses and Eddie's best table broken in half. Through it all, Martha Wells went about her business. She opened the store at 7 and closed at 6. She smiled at customers, ordered new inventory, swept the floors. The only sign that anything bothered her was the way she'd pause sometimes, looking out the window toward the street where Jake's horse was usually tied. On the 3rd morning, Jake woke to find his horse gone. Not loose, not wandered off. The rope had been cut clean through, and there were no tracks leading away from the hitching post. He searched the town for 2 hours, getting angrier with each passing minute, until he finally stormed into the sheriff's office. The sheriff was an older man with white hair and tired eyes. Sam Parker had kept the peace in Copper Ridge for 23 years, and he looked at Jake with the expression of someone who'd seen every type of troublemaker there was. My horse is stolen, Jake said, and I want it found. Now, Sam leaned back in his chair. You sure it's stolen? Maybe it just wandered off. The rope was cut. That's theft, and you need to do something about it. I'll look into it, Sam said. In the meantime, you can pay for the damages you caused at the saloon. Eddie says you owe him $40 for the table. I ain't paying for nothing. That fight wasn't my fault. Then you'll sit in a cell until you change your mind. Jake felt trapped. Without his horse, he couldn't leave town. Without money, he couldn't buy another one. And somehow, impossibly, he was backed into a corner by people who barely seemed to notice he existed. This is because of that old woman, isn't it? Jake said. She's got you all wrapped around her finger. Sam's expression hardened. Martha Wells is a pillar of this community. You disrespected her. You disrespected all of us. And now you're learning what that costs. What are you, her personal guard dog?
I'm the sheriff, and I'm giving you a choice.
Pay for the damages, apologize to the people you've wronged, and we'll help you find your horse. Or keep being a problem, and you'll find yourself in a cell with no horse, no money, and no friends. Jake left the office seething. He walked through town checking every stable, every barn, every place a horse might be hidden. He found nothing. It was like the animal had vanished into thin air. By afternoon, he was exhausted and desperate. He sat down on the steps outside the general store, his head in his hands, trying to figure out his next move. The door opened behind him. Martha stepped out with a broom and started sweeping the boardwalk. She worked around him without a word, her movements efficient and practiced. Jake watched her for a minute, then spoke. You took my horse. I did no such thing. I'm 73 years old. How would I steal a horse? You got someone to do it for you. This whole town's in on it. Martha stopped sweeping and looked at him. You think we're all conspirators? That we all got together and planned this? Young man, we don't need to conspire. You made yourself unwelcome. People respond accordingly. I want my horse back. Then I suggest you think about what the sheriff told you. Jake stood up, his fists clenched. I ain't apologizing to nobody. I didn't do nothing wrong. Martha smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Jake's anger falter. It wasn't cruel or mocking. It was almost sad, like she was looking at a child who hadn't learned an important lesson yet. You really believe that, don't you? She said. You think respect is weakness. You think kindness is stupidity. You've been hurt, probably, and you decided the world owed you something. So you take what you want and push people around, and when they push back, you act surprised. You don't know nothing about me.
I know enough. I've seen men like you before.
They come through town thinking they're tough, thinking they're above the rules that keep communities together, and they always leave smaller than they arrived. She went back to sweeping, dismissing him. Jake wanted to say something cutting, something that would hurt her the way her words hurt him, but he couldn't find the words. He walked away instead, heading toward the saloon. Eddie was behind the bar polishing glasses. He looked up when Jake entered, but didn't speak. Jake sat at the bar and put his last few coins down. Whiskey. Eddie poured the drink. Heard you lost your horse? Somebody stole it. Shame. Good horse like that, worth a lot of money. Jake drank the whiskey in one swallow. I need work. You hiring? Nope. Know anyone who is? Eddie thought for a moment. Martha might need help at the store. Heavy lifting, moving inventory. She can't do it all herself anymore. Jake laughed bitterly. You're joking. I'm serious. She pays fair, and room and board comes with it. There's a small room above the store. I'd rather sleep in the street. Eddie shrugged. Suit yourself. But winter's coming, and sleeping in the street gets cold. Jake left the saloon and wandered to the edge of town. He could walk to the next settlement, maybe 15 miles north, but without supplies he'd never make it. He could steal a horse, but the sheriff would hunt him down for that. He was stuck, truly stuck, and he couldn't figure out how an old woman and a quiet town had managed to trap him so completely. Part 4. That night, Jake slept in the stable, curled up in an empty stall with hay for a pillow. The horses stamped and snorted around him, and he lay awake for hours, cold and angry and confused. By morning, he'd made a decision. He'd swallow his pride, do whatever it took to get out of this town, and then never think about Copper Ridge again. He found Martha opening the store at 7, same as always. She looked surprised to see him standing there, his clothes wrinkled and hay in his hair. I need work, he said. Eddie mentioned you might be hiring. Martha studied him for a long moment. Why the change of heart? I need money. That's all. Not good enough. If you work for me, I need to know you'll do the job properly and treat people with respect. Can you do that? Jake wanted to tell her where she could stick her job, but he bit his tongue. Yes. Say it like you mean it. Yes, Mrs. Wells. I can do that. She nodded. All right. Come inside. We'll start with the inventory in the back. There are crates that need unpacking, shelves that need organizing. You'll work 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. I'll pay you $2 a day, plus meals, and the room upstairs. You'll take Sundays off. Deal? Deal? The work was harder than Jake expected. The crates were heavy, full of canned goods and dry supplies that needed to be sorted and stacked. His back ached after the first hour, and by lunch his hands were covered in splinters. Martha brought him a sandwich and water, set them on a crate, and went back to helping customers without a word. Jake ate quickly and got back to work. He told himself he'd do this for a week, maybe 2, just long enough to earn money for a horse and supplies. Then he'd leave and never look back. But as the days passed, something strange happened. The routine of the work started to settle into his bones. Wake up, wash, eat breakfast that Martha left for him, work through the morning, take lunch, work through the afternoon, eat dinner, sleep. It was simple and predictable, and Jake found himself thinking less about leaving and more about the tasks in front of him. Martha didn't talk to him much those first few days. She'd give him instructions in the morning and check his progress at noon, but otherwise she left him alone. Other people in town still avoided him. When he walked down the street, conversations would stop. When he entered the saloon for a drink after work, people would move to different tables. On the 5th day, a woman came into the store with a young boy, maybe 8 years old. The boy ran up to the candy jars near the counter, his eyes wide with excitement. His mother smiled and told him he could pick one piece. The boy deliberated with the seriousness of someone making a life-changing decision. Jake watched from the back room where he was unpacking a shipment of flour. Something about the scene made his chest tight. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen pure joy on anyone's face, the uncomplicated happiness of a child choosing candy. The boy finally picked a peppermint stick. Martha wrapped it carefully in paper and handed it over with a warm smile. The mother paid and thanked her, and they left the store together, the boy already unwrapping his treasure. "You have kids?" Martha asked, not looking at Jake. "No. Ever want them?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know. Never thought about it much. Most people don't until they see what they could have. Then it's either something they want desperately or something that terrifies them." Jake didn't know what to say to that, so he went back to work. But that night, lying in the small room above the store, he thought about the question. He thought about the life he'd been living, drifting from town to town, making enemies, never putting down roots. He thought about what would happen if he kept living that way for another 10 years, another 20. He'd end up alone somewhere, broke and bitter, with nothing but regrets. The next morning he came downstairs to find Martha struggling with a barrel of pickles that had been delivered to the front door. He took it from her without a word and rolled it to its place in the corner. She thanked him, and he noticed for the first time how thin her wrists were, how the work of running this store must wear on her despite her determination not to show it. "How long have you run this place alone?" he asked. "Since my husband died. 15 years now." "That's a long time." "It is, but the store keeps me busy, and the people here keep me company." "Unlucky. You don't have family who could help?" Martha's expression softened. "My grandchildren moved east. Good jobs waiting for them there. Better opportunities than Copper Ridge can offer. I miss them, but I'm glad they're building good lives." Jake nodded. He couldn't imagine caring about someone enough to be happy about them leaving. That kind of love seemed foreign to him, something other people understood but he'd never quite grasped. Over the following days, Jake started noticing more. He noticed how Martha always had a kind word for everyone who came through the door. He noticed how she'd slip extra supplies into the bags of families who were struggling without making them feel like charity cases. He noticed how people trusted her with their problems, asking advice about everything from sick livestock to troubled marriages. And slowly, carefully, people in town started treating him differently too. A rancher nodded to him on the street. The woman with the young son smiled when she saw him in the store. Eddie poured his whiskey without the previous coldness. It was like Jake was becoming real to them, transforming from a problem into a person. Part 5. 2 weeks after Jake started working at the store, his horse reappeared. He came downstairs one morning to find it tied to the hitching post outside, his saddle and bags exactly as he'd left them. There was no note, no explanation, just the horse standing there calmly as if it had never been gone. Jake stood on the boardwalk staring at the animal. This was what he'd wanted. The means to leave, to go back to his old life. He could pack up right now, ride out, and be in the next territory by nightfall. But his feet didn't move. He stood there for 5 minutes, maybe more, until Martha came out to see what he was looking at. "Well," she said, "looks like someone found your horse." "Yeah? Looks like. You planning to leave?" The morning sun lit up her silver hair, and her eyes held that same steady kindness he'd seen every day for 2 weeks. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Part of me wants to." "And the other part?" "The other part thinks maybe I've been running from the wrong things." Martha smiled. "That's wisdom talking. Took you a while to hear it, but better late than never." They stood in silence for a moment. And Jake said, "I want to apologize for what I said when I first came to town. The way I treated you. It was wrong." Apology accepted. "But you should know, I wasn't the only one you hurt. Eddie's still got a broken table. The ranchers whose gardens you tore up are still replanting. The people you insulted and pushed around, they deserve to hear you're sorry too. I know. I'll make it right. All of it. Good. Then come inside. We've got a delivery coming in an hour, and I'll need help unloading it. Jake followed her into the store, leaving his horse tied outside. He spent the morning working alongside Martha, and when the afternoon lull came, he walked through town stopping at each place he'd caused trouble. He apologized to Eddie and promised to work off the cost of the table. He apologized to the ranchers and offered to help replant their gardens. He apologized to the people he'd insulted, including Deputy Carl Baker, who shook his hand and told him everyone deserves a second chance. It took 3 days to make his rounds, and by the end Jake felt lighter than he had in years. The weight he'd been carrying, all that anger and resentment, had started to lift. He wasn't sure where it came from or when it had gotten so heavy, but letting it go felt like taking off a coat he'd been wearing too long. Martha watched these changes with quiet approval. She didn't praise him or make a big deal about it, but Jake could tell she noticed. The way she'd sometimes nod when he did something right, or the way she'd leave him better cuts of meat at dinner, small gestures that said more than words could. One evening, about a month after Jake had started working at the store, Martha closed up early and invited him to sit on the front porch. She brought out 2 glasses of lemonade and settled into her rocking chair with a sigh. "I have a proposition for you," she said. "All right. I'm getting old, Jake. I can admit that now. This store is too much for one person, and I don't have family here to take it over when I'm gone. I've been thinking about selling it, but I'd hate to see it go to someone who'd just see it as a business and nothing more." Jake waited, sensing where this was going. "You've changed," Martha continued. "Maybe not completely, and maybe you'll never be perfect, but you've learned something important these past weeks. You've learned that respect and kindness aren't weaknesses. They're what hold communities together. They're what make life worth living." "I'm starting to see that," Jake said. "So here's my offer. Stay on for another year. Learn the business inside and out. Learn the people, the suppliers, the rhythm of this town. At the end of that year, if you've proven yourself, I'll sell you the store for half what it's worth. You can pay me back over time, and when I'm gone, it'll be yours completely." Jake stared at her. "Why would you do that?" "Why trust me after everything? Because I've lived long enough to know the difference between someone who's truly bad and someone who's just lost. You were lost, Jake, but you found your way here, and I think maybe that wasn't an accident." Jake looked out at the street, at the town that had once seemed like just another stop on an endless road. Now it looked different. He could see the care people put into their homes, the way neighbors helped each other, the quiet strength of a community that took care of its own. "I accept," he said, "and thank you for not giving up on me when you had every reason to." Martha patted his hand. "Everyone deserves a chance to become better. Most people just need someone to believe they can." They sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jake thought about the man he'd been when he rode into Copper Ridge, full of anger and arrogance, thinking he was above these people and their simple lives. That man seemed like a stranger now. The next year passed in a blur of hard work and slow growth. Jake learned every aspect of running the store. He learned which suppliers were reliable, which customers needed credit during hard times, how to balance the books and make tough decisions. He learned the stories of everyone in town, their struggles and triumphs, and found himself caring about their lives in a way he'd never cared about anything before. He fixed up the room above the store, making it a real home. He started attending church, not because he was particularly religious, but because it was where the community gathered. He helped organize the town's harvest festival and donated supplies when families fell on hard times. Slowly, steadily, he became part of Copper Ridge in a way that felt permanent and right. Martha's health declined gradually over that year. She moved slower, tired more easily, needed more help with the heavy work. But her mind stayed sharp, and she continued to run the store with Jake, teaching him everything she knew. On the day she officially signed the papers making him the new owner, she cried, and Jake realized he was crying too.
"You've done well," she told him.
"Better than I ever expected. This store is in good hands." Jake wanted to tell her that she'd saved his life, that he'd been heading down a dark path, and she'd offered him a way back to something good. But the words felt too small for what he was feeling, so he just hugged her and hoped she understood. Martha lived another 2 years, long enough to see Jake marry a school teacher named Lucy who'd moved to town from Denver, long enough to see them start fixing up a house on the edge of town, long enough to know that her store in her town would continue long after she was gone. When she finally passed peacefully in her sleep, the entire town turned out for her funeral, and Jake stood at the front, giving a eulogy that made even the toughest ranchers wipe their eyes. Years later, when people asked Jake how he ended up in Copper Ridge, he'd tell them about riding into town full of anger, about disrespecting an old woman who saw through his act, about how she'd given him a chance when no one else would. He'd tell them that Martha Wells taught him the most important lesson he'd ever learned, that strength isn't about pushing people down, it's about lifting them up, and that sometimes the people who challenge us the most are the ones who save us. The general store still stands in Copper Ridge, passed down through generations, a testament to one woman's wisdom and one man's willingness to change. And if you visit on a quiet afternoon, you might see the owner sitting on the front porch with a glass of lemonade, watching the street with the same steady kindness that Martha Wells once showed a lost, angry cowboy who needed to find his way home.